The alarm in my chest translator goes off before the human delegation even sits down, and I do not know why. My name is Vantor Thess, Senior Envoy of the Ancile Concord, and I have sat across from 412 species in my long career. None of them ever made my translator flinch before a single word was spoken. The chamber is round, built from pale stone, quarried from a dead moon, meant to remind every visitor of how old we are and how young they are. 6 great banners hang from the ceiling, one for each founding species of the Concord. There is no banner for humanity yet. There is only a folding chair set at the edge of the room, near the door, as if someone expected them to need a quick way out. I am wrong about that, but I do not know it yet. The human delegation walks in exactly on time, not a second early, not a second late. There are 5 of them. The woman in front introduces herself as Claire Bennett, lead negotiator for the planet Earth. She has short brown hair and a gray coat with no medals, no rank markings, nothing to announce who she is. Behind her walks a tall man named Daniel Ashford, who I am told commands something called a fleet reserve, though our intelligence reports list Earth's fleet as barely worth mentioning. Beside him is a quieter woman, Grace Sutton, who carries a data slate and writes on it constantly, though I never once see her look down at what she is writing. The last 2 are younger, a man called Nathan Pierce and a woman called Ellen Marsh, both introduced only as advisors, though advisors to what, nobody explains. I watch them take the folding chair we left by the door and simply move it themselves, carrying it to the main table without asking permission, without waiting for an usher. They set it down at the end of the table, facing the council directly, and Claire Bennett sits in it like it was always meant to be there. The Grand Speaker of the Concord, an elder of the Dravane species named Osuk Vel, taps the table twice, which is our custom for opening a session. Osuk has presided over first contact talks with over 60 species. I have never seen him nervous. Today, for half a second, his eye stalks twitch toward me before he begins. Representatives of Earth, Osuk says, his voice carried low and formal through the translation field, you stand before the governing council of the Ancile Concord, an alliance older than your written history. We welcome you to this historic session, where the terms of your civilization's place among the stars will be set. Claire Bennett folds her hands on the table. She does not smile, but she does not frown either. Her face is unreadable, in a way that unsettles me more than open hostility would. Thank you for having us, she says. We're listening. Those 3 words hang in the air longer than they should. Every other species that has sat in that chair began with gratitude, with promises, with careful flattery, meant to soften what came next. Some began with tears. A few, in the early years, began with threats they could not back up, and we corrected them quickly. Claire Bennett begins with nothing at all. She simply waits. Osuk continues, listing the standard opening terms, the ones we give to every new species before real negotiation starts. Earth will be granted observer status within the Concord. Earth's military technology will be cataloged and reviewed by a Concord Oversight Board. Earth's expansion into surrounding star systems will be limited to a designated buffer zone, pending a century of evaluation. It is the same speech I have heard given to a dozen species before, some grateful for the chance, some resentful but resigned. I watch Grace Sutton's stylus move across her slate the entire time Osuk speaks. I still cannot see what she writes. I lean slightly to my right, toward my aide, a young Ithkar named Senek, and I whisper through our private channel, asking him to run a translation scan on her handwriting through the room's sensors. He tries. He tells me the sensors cannot get an angle on the slate. I find this strange, because our sensors can read a grain of dust from across a solar system, and yet somehow this human woman's handwriting is invisible to them. When Osuk finishes, he asks the humans if they have questions before formal terms are drafted. Daniel Ashford speaks for the first time. His voice is calm, almost pleasant, the voice of a man discussing weather rather than the fate of his species. How many warships does the Concord currently have stationed within 4 light-years of Sol? He asks. The question catches Osuk off guard, and honestly, it catches me off guard too. It is not a diplomatic question. It is a targeting question, the kind an intelligence officer asks before a campaign, not the kind a guest asks at a welcoming dinner. Ossock recovers quickly, offering the polite non-answer we give to all new species. Concord fleet deployments are a matter of internal security, and such details are shared only after formal alliance status is granted. Daniel Ashford nods once, as though he expected exactly that answer, and says nothing further. But I notice Grace Sutton's stylus pause, then move again, writing something down. I notice Nathan Pierce glance toward the ceiling, toward the corner where our surveillance node sits hidden behind an ornamental carving, a node that should be undetectable to any species we have ever met. He looks directly at it. I feel a cold thread crawl through the lower half of my spine, the place where my species keeps the instinct our ancestors used to sense predators in tall grass. I have not felt that thread in 300 years. I did not expect to feel it in a chamber built from stone, surrounded by guards, across a table from creatures who have possessed spaceflight for less than one human lifetime. The session moves into a recess, as all first sessions do, giving the council time to draft formal terms based on the opening statements. As delegates rise and begin to file out for refreshment, I find myself walking near the human table, close enough to hear Claire Bennett speaking quietly to her advisors. "They didn't answer the fleet question," Daniel Ashford says. "I didn't expect them to," Claire replies. "That wasn't really the point of asking." "What was the point?" Nathan Pierce asks. Claire Bennett looks up, and for the briefest moment, her eyes meet mine across the room. I am too far to be part of their conversation, and yet I feel as though her answer is meant for me as much as for them. "The point," she says, "was to see how they answer questions they don't want to answer. Now we know." I do not understand what she means, not yet. I tell myself it is nothing, a strange phrase lost in translation, the kind of thing that happens often enough between species with different customs of speech. I want very badly to believe that. I return to my private quarters that evening and pull the full recording of the session, watching it 3 times. I am searching for the moment I felt wrong, trying to locate exactly what set off the alarm in my translator earlier. I find it near the very end, in something so small I almost missed it the first 2 times. When Ossock finished listing the buffer zone restrictions that would confine humanity to a small pocket of space for a full century, Claire Bennett wrote a single word on the paper notepad in front of her, the old-fashioned kind of notepad, paper and ink, that I found charmingly primitive when she first pulled it out. I zoomed the recording as far as our optical technology allows. The word she wrote, in careful human script, is noted. Just that. Noted. Not outrage, not desperation, not even irritation, just a single quiet word, written down like an entry in a ledger, filed away for later use. I have negotiated with species who begged. I have negotiated with species who threatened, who postured, who wept, who offered their firstborn as tribute out of sheer terror at what we might do to their homeworld if we were displeased. I have never once negotiated with a species that simply wrote things down. The next morning, before the second session begins, my aide Seneca approaches me with a report from our Fleet Intelligence Office. He looks disturbed, his eye stalks drawn tight against his skull, a sign of distress among my people that I have rarely seen in him. "Envoy Thess," he says, "there is something wrong with the Human Systems Catalog." I ask what he means. He explains that our technology assessment teams were given full access to Earth's declared military registry as part of the standard evaluation process, the same process every new species undergoes before formal terms are set. Every species we have ever met either overstates their strength, hoping to bargain from a position of respect, or understates it, hoping to seem harmless and unworthy of attention. Humanity's registry, Seneca tells me, does neither. It is precise. It is thorough. It lists exact numbers, exact locations, exact capabilities, down to details that our own analysts consider almost embarrassingly honest. That should be good news, I say. Cooperation is good news. Seneca's voice drops lower. "Envoy, The numbers are small, smaller than we assumed. If this registry is accurate, humanity has perhaps 1/20th the military strength we estimated before contact. I feel a strange relief at this, the kind of relief a person feels when a shadow they feared turns out to be nothing more than a coat rack. Then there is no danger here, I say. We proceed with the standard terms, and Earth accepts its place, as every other species has. Senek does not look relieved. He looks more afraid than before. Envoy, he says, why would a species show us their full weakness unless they were certain it did not matter what we did with that knowledge? I do not have an answer for him. I tell him to file the report and prepare it for the council, and I tell myself, once again, that it is nothing, a strange but ultimately harmless choice by an inexperienced species still learning the customs of galactic diplomacy. I believe this for exactly one more day. The second session begins with Osuk presenting formal terms, the full document this time, thick with clauses about tribute resources, technology sharing requirements, and the permanent seating arrangement that would place Earth's future representatives at the back of this very chamber, behind every other member species, a position meant to remind them, gently but firmly, of their place in the order of things. Claire Bennett listens to every word without interruption. Daniel Ashford's face does not change. Grace Sutton's stylus moves without pause. Nathan Pierce and Ellen Marsh sit perfectly still, hands folded, eyes forward. When Osuk finishes, the chamber falls into the silence that always follows the reading of terms, a silence in which every species before them has either begun to negotiate, to plead, or to accept. I lean forward slightly in my seat, waiting to hear which kind of silence this will be. Claire Bennett breaks it with 4 words that I will remember for the rest of my long life. "We have a question," she says. Osuk gestures for her to continue. "Before we respond to your terms," she says, "we would like an honest answer to something. What happens to species who refuse?" The chamber goes very still. It is not a question that is normally asked, because it is not a question that ever needs to be asked. Every species refuses at first, argues, tries to bargain, and eventually accepts, because the alternative has never, in living memory, actually happened. Osuk answers carefully, the way one answers a child asking about death for the first time. No species has refused the terms of the Concord and remained outside our protection for long, he says. It would not be safe for them. Claire Bennett nods slowly, as though this confirms something she already suspected. "Thank you," she says. "That's all we needed to know." And then, without raising her voice, without a single wasted motion, she does something no representative of any species has ever done in this chamber in 300 years of recorded history. She stands up. She stands up, and the sound of her chair sliding back against the stone floor is the loudest thing in the chamber. Daniel Ashford stands a half-second after her, then Grace Sutton, then Nathan Pierce, then Ellen Marsh, all rising in a motion so smooth it looks rehearsed, though I will later learn it was not rehearsed at all. It did not need to be. They simply moved the way people move when they have already made a decision together, long before they ever walked into this room. Osuk Vel's eye stalks freeze mid-motion. I have known him for 200 years, and I have never once seen him freeze. "Representative Bennett," he says, his voice climbing half an octave from its usual measured tone, "the session is not concluded. There are terms still to be discussed." "There aren't, actually," Claire says. "You've told us what happens to species who refuse. We heard you. We don't need to hear the rest." "You misunderstand," Osuk says, and for the first time in the 2 centuries I have served beside him, I hear something in his voice that sounds almost like pleading. "These terms are generous. Every species accepts them in time. It is simply how things are done." Claire Bennett looks at him, and there is no anger in her expression at all, which somehow makes it worse. "We understand exactly how things are done here," she says. "We've understood since we walked in. That's why we're leaving." A council member from the Voss delegation, an older female named Carson Iol, rises from her seat further down the table, her voice sharp with the particular kind of fear that likes to disguise itself as insult. You would walk away from the single greatest alliance in the known galaxy over a seating arrangement, over a buffer zone that would take your species a century to fill regardless. This is the arrogance of a species that has not yet learned its place. Nathan Pierce, the youngest of the five, is the one who answers her, and his voice carries none of the sharpness hers did. "It's not about the seating," he says. "It's about what you just told us. You said no species has ever refused and stayed free for long. That's not a term, that's a threat, and we don't sign agreements with people who open with threats." Carson Eole opens her mouth to respond, but Claire Bennett is already walking, and the rest of her delegation falls into step behind her, moving toward the great doors at the rear of the chamber, doors that have not been opened mid-session in longer than I have been alive. I do something then that I still cannot fully explain to myself, even now. I rise from my seat, breaking every protocol of my office, and I follow them. I catch up to them in the long corridor outside the chamber, a hallway lined with statues of the founding delegates of the Concord, each one carved from stone, taken from a world that species no longer calls home, each one meant to remind visitors of the price of unity. My footsteps echo against the marble, and Claire Bennett stops walking, turning to face me, though the rest of her team continues a few steps further before they too stop and turn. "Envoy Thess," she says. She knows my name. I did not tell her my name. I do not remember anyone telling her my name. "Representative Bennett," I say, because it is the only thing I can think to say. "May I ask why you are leaving?" She studies me for a long moment, the way a person studies a puzzle they have already solved, but are deciding whether it is worth explaining to someone else. "You already know why," she says. "You felt it in there. I saw your translator light up before Osuk even finished his opening statement. I do not deny it. I find to my own surprise that I do not want to deny it. We are not afraid of the Concord," she continues, and her voice is not loud, but it fills the corridor completely, the way certain truths do when spoken plainly. "We came here because we hoped there was a different way, a conversation between equals. What we found instead was an organization that measures every new species by how quickly it can be made to kneel. We're not interested in kneeling, Envoy Thess. We never were. You understand what this means," I say, and I am surprised by how much my voice trembles as I say it. Species who refuse the Concord do not remain independent. History has shown this again and again. History has shown that species who refuse alone do not remain independent. Daniel Ashford says, stepping closer. "We noticed you said alone. We're curious whether that word was intentional." I do not answer him, because I do not know how to answer him. The truth is that word was intentional, chosen carefully by Osuk decades ago as part of the standard doctrine briefing given to every Concord negotiator, though I had never once questioned why the word existed until this exact moment. Grace Sutton speaks for the first time since I have arrived, her voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable edge. "We're not alone," she says. "That's the part your council hasn't figured out yet." I feel that cold thread again, the ancestral one, climbing slowly up my spine. "What do you mean?" I ask, though some part of me already suspects I do not want to hear the answer. Claire Bennett glances at her team, a brief unspoken exchange, and then she turns back to me, and her expression softens slightly, not with weakness, but with something closer to sympathy, the way a person might look at someone about to learn a painful truth about the world. "Envoy Thess, how many species has the Concord absorbed over the last 3 centuries who came to you afraid? Species who signed your terms because they believed they had no other choice." I begin listing them out of habit, the way I have recited these facts to junior diplomats 100 times before. The Voss joined willingly. The Karnathi accepted terms after a difficult first contact. The Ithkar, my own people, joined 400 years ago during a period of great instability. The Osway, the Trellin, the Ephira. "Stop," she says gently, and I stop. "How many of those species do you think were happy with the terms they signed?" I open my mouth to answer, and find that I cannot. In 300 years, I have never once asked myself that question, because it has never once mattered to the outcome of a negotiation. Species accepted the terms. That was the end of the matter. Whether they were happy was never part of the equation. We've been listening, Claire says, since before we ever sat down at that table. Not just to the Concord, to everyone the Concord has ever swallowed. There are a lot of quiet conversations happening across a lot of star systems right now. Envoy Thess, conversations your council doesn't know about yet, because your council has never once asked a species what it actually wants, instead of what it's been told to accept. I feel the floor tilt slightly beneath me, though I know it is only the sensation of understanding arriving faster than I am prepared for it. You have been building alliances, I say slowly, testing the words as I say them, with species already inside the Concord. We've been having honest conversations, Nathan Pierce corrects. There's a difference. You call it an alliance because that's the only word your doctrine has for cooperation. We just call it talking to people. Ellen Marsh, who has said almost nothing this entire time, finally speaks, and her voice is the softest of all of them, which somehow makes it land the hardest. You should also know, she says, that we've been talking to some species outside the Concord as well. Ones your council doesn't consider worth the effort of first contact. Ones you've written off as too small, too poor, too far out on the edge of civilized space to matter. Why would you do that? I ask, though I already suspect the answer. Because everyone matters, Ellen says simply. That's kind of the whole point. I stand in that corridor, surrounded by statues of the great unifiers of the galaxy, and I feel something that I have never once felt in 300 years of service to the Concord. I feel small. Not because humanity has more ships, or greater weapons, or some hidden power we failed to detect. I feel small because I am suddenly aware that an entire structure I have spent my life defending was built on an assumption so basic that no one ever thought to question it. That species left alone, without our protection, without our order, would fall into chaos and ruin. Humanity did not fall into chaos. Humanity built quiet friendships in the shadows of our own alliance, one careful conversation at a time, for longer than we ever noticed. Why show us this? I ask. Why tell me any of this at all? You could have simply walked away and let us discover the truth on our own. Claire Bennett considers this for a moment, and when she answers, there is no triumph in her voice, only a strange and quiet honesty that I did not expect from a species we once dismissed as young and unformed. Because you followed us into this hallway, she says. Nobody else in that chamber did that. Every other delegate in there is still sitting at the table, waiting for us to come back and apologize. You came looking for the truth instead. That matters to us, Envoy Thess, more than you probably realize. I do not know how to respond to that. I have spent 300 years believing that truth, in diplomacy, is a tool to be measured out carefully, used only when it serves a strategic purpose. I am standing in front of 5 humans who have just handed me the truth for no reason at all, except that I asked for it honestly. What happens now? I ask. Daniel Ashford is the one who answers, and his voice, for the first time since I met him, carries a weight that sounds almost like a warning, though I do not think he means it as one. Now your council goes back inside and pretends this didn't happen, he says. They'll draft a formal protest. They'll send envoys to Earth demanding an explanation. They'll remind everyone that no species has ever refused the Concord and remained free. And what will humanity do? I ask. We'll answer the protest, Claire says. Politely, honestly, and then we'll keep doing exactly what we've been doing since before this summit ever started, which is exactly what every free species has the right to do. We'll keep talking to people. We'll keep building something better than what you've built here. And we'll let the results speak for themselves. She turns to leave, and her delegation turns with her, moving toward the exit at the end of the long corridor, toward the transport that will carry them back to a ship waiting somewhere beyond this station's docking rings. I call out after her, one final question rising in my throat before I can stop it. Representative Bennett, I say, are you not afraid of what the Concord might do in retaliation? She stops, but does not turn around this time. Her answer comes back to me quietly, carried down the corridor between the statues of ancient unifiers who never once imagined a species that would simply choose to walk away. Envoy Thess, she says, we stopped being afraid the moment we understood what fear had built. Ask your council what they're planning. Then ask yourself whether you still believe in it. And then she is gone, her footsteps fading into the vast quiet of the station, leaving me alone among statues carved from the bones of worlds that no longer remember their own names. I return to the council chamber alone, and the doors close behind me with a sound heavier than I remember them making before. The great table is in chaos, though a controlled kind of chaos, the kind that senior diplomats fall into when they have spent centuries practicing composure and suddenly find they have no practiced response ready. Osukvel stands at the head of the table, his eye stalks drawn tight, addressing the remaining council members in a voice stripped of its usual calm authority. This is a formality, he insists, though he insists it 3 times in the space of a minute, which tells me he does not believe it himself. Every species postures before accepting terms. The Carnathi delegation walked out of talks in the 2nd year of contact, and they returned within a month. The Carnathi did not have their own fleet, says a Trellan delegate near the far end of the table, a thin creature named Wessa Kor, who rarely speaks unless the matter is serious. The Carnathi had no choice but to return. Do we know that the humans have no choice? Silence follows her question, the kind of silence that spreads across a room like cold water. I take my seat quietly, hoping no one notices I had been gone at all, though Osuk's eye stalks flick toward me the moment I sit, and I know he noticed everything. Envoy Thess, he says, you followed them. What did you learn? Every eye in the chamber turns toward me. I feel the old instinct rise, the diplomat's instinct to soften, to shade the truth into something more comfortable for the room to hear. I have spent 300 years perfecting that instinct. And yet, standing there with Claire Bennett's voice still echoing in the corridor of my memory, I find I do not want to use it anymore. I learned, I say slowly, that we have made an assumption for 3 centuries that has never once been tested. We assumed that species left outside the Concord's protection would collapse into disorder, that our order was the only thing standing between them and ruin. Humanity has spent its grace period building relationships with other species, inside our alliance and outside it, quietly, without our knowledge, and apparently without any collapse into disorder at all. The chamber erupts into overlapping voices, some outraged, some disbelieving, a few strangely quiet, as though certain delegates already suspected something like this, and had simply never said it aloud. Carson Ayol slams her palm against the table. Impossible, she says. No species could coordinate such a thing without our intelligence networks detecting it. Our networks span every settled system in this quadrant. Perhaps, I say, our networks were built to detect threats that look like threats. Fleets massing, weapons testing, border incursions. What if humanity built something that never once looked like a threat at all? What if it only ever looked like conversation? Wessa Kor leans forward, her thin fingers tapping the table in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. You are suggesting, she says, that the humans did not build an army, they built a network of trust. And we have no instrument in our arsenal designed to detect trust, because we never imagined we would need one. I do not answer her directly, but I do not need to, because the silence that follows her words tells me every delegate at the table understands exactly what she means, whether or not they wish to admit it. Osuk calls for a formal vote on how to proceed, and the debate that follows lasts nearly 3 hours, though I will not recount every argument made, because most of them circle the same fear from different angles. Some council members demand an immediate show of force, a fleet dispatched to Sol to remind Earth of the consequences of refusal. Others argue for patience, for a diplomatic mission sent quietly to smooth over what they insist on calling a misunderstanding. A small minority, led quietly by Wessa Kor, argue for something far more uncomfortable, that the Concord reconsider its terms entirely, not because of any fear of humanity's military strength, but because the humans might be right about something none of us wanted to examine too closely. That minority loses the vote. Carson Ayol's position wins, not through the strength of her argument, but through the strength of old habit. The Council orders a formal fleet posture change, a movement of ships toward the border of human space, framed carefully in the official record as a demonstration of resolve rather than a threat, though everyone in that chamber knows exactly what it actually is. I am assigned, along with Wessa Corps, to accompany the diplomatic mission that will follow the fleet, tasked with delivering a formal protest to the human government and demanding an explanation for what the official record now calls an irregular departure from established negotiation protocols. We depart 3 days later aboard a Concorde cruiser named the Ancile Vigil, a ship I have traveled on a dozen times before, always for routine diplomatic business, never once with the sense of dread that follows me up its boarding ramp this time. The journey to the edge of human space takes 11 days at standard Concorde travel speeds. I spend much of it reviewing every scrap of intelligence our analysts have gathered on Earth in the years since first contact, searching for something, anything, that might explain what I witnessed in that corridor. Most of the reports are exactly what I expected: population figures, industrial output, a modest network of colonized systems still young enough to be considered fragile by Concorde standards. But buried in an appendix, added almost as an afterthought by a junior analyst who clearly did not understand the significance of what she had found, is a note about communications traffic. Standard Concorde monitoring stations, positioned along neutral trade routes throughout the quadrant, had detected an unusually high volume of civilian frequency transmissions originating from human vessels over the past several years. The transmissions were dismissed at the time as cultural exchange programs, harmless broadcasts of music, literature, and educational material sent to smaller, less developed species along the trade routes. The kind of thing our own cultural ministries occasionally engage in as a low-priority public relations exercise. I request the raw data on these transmissions and spend 2 full days of the journey reviewing translated fragments. What I find is not cultural exchange in the way our analysts assumed. Embedded within the broadcasts, alongside the music and literature, are direct messages addressed to specific planetary governments, offering trade partnerships, technology sharing agreements, and something the analyst's notes translate loosely as mutual defense understanding, though I suspect the true translation carries far more weight than that phrase suggests. I bring this to Wessa Corps in the ship's small observation lounge, and she reads the data in silence for a long while before speaking. "How long has this been happening?" she asks. "Based on the earliest transmissions I can find," I say, "at least 6 years, possibly longer. Our monitoring stations logged the traffic and filed it as harmless, because it never once resembled a military communication." "Because it wasn't one," Wessa says quietly. "It was something we never built a category for." I ask her the question that has been sitting in my chest since I left the corridor outside the chamber, the one I am almost afraid to say aloud. "Do you think the Concorde can survive this?" Wessa Corps is quiet for a long moment, watching the stars slide past the observation window, streaks of light bending around the edges of the ship's field drive. "The Concorde has survived for 3 centuries, she says finally, not because it was strong, but because no one ever tested whether it was. We built an order out of the assumption that species had no alternative to us. Humanity has just shown a dozen worlds that they do. I do not know if the Concorde can survive discovering that the thing holding it together was never strength at all. It was simply that no one had thought to ask." I do not sleep well for the remainder of the journey. I keep hearing Claire Bennett's voice in the quiet hours before ship's dawn, asking me whether I still believe in what the Council is planning. I find, with a discomfort I cannot fully name, that I no longer know how to answer that question. On the 10th day of our journey, the Ancile Vigil receives an emergency transmission from the lead elements of the fleet, already positioned near the buffer zone bordering human space. The message is short, and it is not addressed to me, but Wessa Corps shares it with me anyway, her expression carefully controlled in a way that tells me she is more disturbed than she wishes to admit. The transmission reports that 3 neutral trade stations along the buffer zone, stations belonging to smaller species not formally part of the Concorde, have refused docking rights to Concorde vessels for the first time in the station's recorded history. No explanation was given beyond a brief, polite message stating that the stations were exercising their independent right to choose their own trading partners. That has never happened before, I say. No, Wessa agrees, it has not. We arrive at the edge of human space on the 11th day, and as our cruiser drops out of its field drive into real space, the sensor operator's voice comes through the ship's comm system, tight with something I have not heard from a Concorde officer in longer than I can remember. Fear. Envoy Thess, the officer says, you should come to the bridge. There is something you need to see. I walk to the bridge with Wessa Core close behind me, and the first thing I notice is the silence. A Concorde bridge crew is trained to remain composed under any circumstance, to report threats in even, measured tones regardless of the danger involved. The silence on this bridge is not the silence of composure. It is the silence of people who do not know what words to use. The main view screen shows the edge of human space, the region our charts have labeled for years as a modest, thinly populated frontier, home to a handful of colony worlds and a scattering of trade outposts too small to warrant serious attention. What the view screen shows now does not match those charts at all. There are ships, many ships, not massed in the aggressive formation of a fleet preparing for battle, but spread out along the buffer zone in a loose, almost conversational pattern, the way ships gather at a crowded trade hub rather than a battlefield. I count vessels bearing the markings of at least 6 different species. Some I recognize from the Concorde's own registry, others I do not recognize at all, unfamiliar hull designs that our intelligence division has no record of ever encountering. Identify those unknown signatures, I say to the sensor officer, and my voice comes out steadier than I feel. Working on it, Envoy, she replies, her hands moving quickly across her console. Preliminary analysis suggests at least 2 of the unknown hull types match species from the far side of the buffer zone, systems the Concorde has never made formal contact with. There is also, she pauses, checking her readings twice before continuing. There is also a vessel bearing markings consistent with the Carnathy civilian registry, but it is not flying Concorde colors. It is flying alongside the human formation. The Carnathy are member species, Wessa says quietly. They joined the Concorde over 200 years ago. Yes, the sensor officer says. This ship is registered to a private Carnathy trading collective. It does not appear to be operating under Concorde authority. I feel that cold thread climb my spine again, faster this time, more insistent. A member species, operating a vessel entirely outside Concorde command structure, sitting comfortably alongside a human formation at the edge of what our own council still insists on calling a demonstration of resolve. Open a channel to the lead human vessel, I say. It takes only moments for the channel to open, faster than protocol usually allows, as though someone on the other end had been waiting for the request. The face that appears on our view screen is not Claire Bennett, but a woman I recognize from the intelligence briefings as a senior human fleet officer named Hannah Pratt, her expression calm, almost welcoming, in a way that unsettles me more than open hostility would. Ancile Vigil, she says. This is Commodore Pratt, of the Earth Frontier Fleet. We've been expecting you. Commodore, I say, choosing my words with the caution of a diplomat walking across unfamiliar ice. I am Envoy Vantor Thess, representing the Ancile Concorde. We come bearing a formal diplomatic protest regarding the conduct of your delegation at the recent summit. I figured, Hannah Pratt says, not unkindly. For what it's worth, Envoy, we're happy to receive it. We're not looking for a fight here. We never were. Then perhaps you can explain, I say, gesturing at the tactical display now populating our secondary screens, showing the full spread of unfamiliar and familiar vessels alike gathered along the buffer zone. Why there appears to be a gathering of independent and member species assembled alongside your fleet, in what our own council will certainly interpret as a hostile coalition. Hannah Pratt's expression shifts slightly, something between patience and genuine regret. It's not a coalition against anyone, Envoy Thess. Those ships are here because we invited representatives from every species we've talked with over the last several years to witness this moment. Not to fight, to watch. We thought it was important that when your fleet arrived expecting a demonstration of resolve, they'd see exactly how many people were paying attention. To what end? Wessa Kor asks, stepping into view of the channel. To the end of showing your council something they've never had to consider before, Hannah says. That the galaxy is bigger than the Concord's borders, and that a great many species out here have been quietly wondering for a long time whether there was a better way to do things than the one they were told they had to accept. We're not here to threaten the Concord envoy. We're here because a lot of people wanted to see, with their own eyes, whether refusing your terms actually meant what your doctrine says it means. And what does it mean? I ask, though I suspect I already know the answer forming in my chest. It means nothing happened, Hannah Pratt says simply. No fleet came to destroy us. No armada descended on Earth to punish us for walking away from a table. Your council sent ships to posture, and we let them posture, because we knew exactly what would happen when every species watching this buffer zone realized that refusing the Concord didn't end in fire and ruin after all. It ended in a conversation. That's the whole point, Envoy Thess. That's what we wanted the galaxy to see. I stand on that bridge for a long moment, saying nothing, because I do not trust myself to speak without my voice betraying the storm building behind my chest. Around me, the bridge crew exchanges glances, some fearful, some strangely relieved, as though a weight they had carried without realizing it was finally being set down. Wessa Kor breaks the silence instead, her voice quieter than I have ever heard it. Commodore Pratt, may I ask a question, delegate to delegate, without it being recorded as part of any formal exchange? Hannah Pratt considers this, then nods once. Go ahead. Are you afraid of what happens next? Wessa asks. Not for your fleet, for the galaxy. If the Concord's order begins to unravel, even slowly, even gently, there will be species who do not know how to survive without it. There will be chaos in places that have never had to manage themselves before. Hannah Pratt's expression softens into something almost gentle, the expression of someone who has thought about this question many times before and has not found an easy answer, only an honest one. Yes, she says. We're afraid of that too. That's exactly why we didn't come here with warships aimed at your border, Envoy Kor. We came here with representatives from a dozen species who've spent years quietly building the kind of trust that doesn't require an armed alliance to hold together. Nobody wants chaos. We just don't believe order has to come with a boot on someone's neck to be worth having. I find my voice again, though it comes out smaller than I intend. What do you want us to tell our council, Commodore? Hannah Pratt looks directly into the camera, and for a moment I feel as though she is speaking not to the Concord, not to the council, but to me alone. Tell them the truth, she says. Tell them exactly what you're seeing right now. Tell them that we didn't build an army in the shadows. We built relationships. And tell them that if they want humanity's respect, or anyone else's out here, they're going to have to earn it the same way we did. One honest conversation at a time. The channel closes, and the bridge falls back into silence, though it is a different silence now than the one I walked into. Heavier with understanding rather than fear. Wessa Kor turns to me. What will you tell the council? I look out at the view screen, at the loose gathering of ships from species familiar and unfamiliar, member and independent, all sitting quietly together at the edge of a border that was supposed to mean something absolute, and I find that for the first time in 300 years of service, I do not know what the correct diplomatic answer is supposed to be. I will tell them the truth, I say finally, whether they are prepared to hear it or not. We remain at the buffer zone for 2 more days, gathering formal statements from the assembled delegates, statements that I know will unsettle the council far more than any weapon ever could. Species after species, when asked why they had come, gave variations of the same answer. They had grown tired of being told that safety only existed within Concord borders, and they wanted to see, with their own eyes, whether that was actually true. On the second night, as I sit alone in the observation lounge, watching the strange, peaceful gathering of ships outside the viewport, Wessa Kor joins me, carrying 2 cups of the warm mineral broth our species drinks, in place of the human custom of tea. "You seem troubled, Envoy Thess," she says, handing me a cup. "I am troubled," I admit. For 300 years I believed I was serving something larger than myself, an order that protected the weak, that gave structure to a galaxy that would otherwise fall into ruin. I am no longer certain that is what I was serving at all. Wessa is quiet for a long moment, watching the ships drift slowly against the starfield. "Perhaps," she says finally, "you were serving exactly what you believed. Perhaps the Concord did protect the weak, once a long time ago, when it was first built. And perhaps somewhere along the way, protection became control, and no one noticed the difference because the two can look identical from the inside. What do we do now?" I ask, and I am aware that I am no longer asking as an envoy of the Concord, but simply as myself. "We go home," Wessa says. "We tell the Council the truth, and then we watch to see whether an order built on control can survive learning that it was never truly needed at all." I think of Claire Bennett's voice in that corridor, quiet and unafraid, asking me whether I still believed in what my council was planning. I think of the words she wrote on her notepad, "Noted," filed away not in anger, but in patience, the patience of a species that had already decided its answer long before the summit began. I do not sleep that night. I sit in the observation lounge until the ship's artificial dawn cycle begins, watching the quiet gathering of ships outside the window, thinking about everything I have believed for 3 centuries, and wondering for the first time whether belief and truth had ever actually been the same thing at all. The Ancile Vigil returns to Concord space 11 days later, and I spend most of that return journey drafting my report in careful, deliberate language, choosing each word the way a person chooses footing on unstable ground. Wessa Kor reviews every draft with me, and by the time we arrive at the council station, we have agreed on a report that contains nothing but the plain truth, stripped of the softening language diplomats are trained to use when a truth is too uncomfortable for those in power to hear easily. The council chamber is fuller than I have ever seen it when Wessa and I are called to present our findings. Every founding species has sent a representative, along with delegates from smaller member worlds who rarely attend general sessions, drawn here by rumors that have apparently already begun spreading faster than any official report could travel. I wonder, as I take my seat at the long table, how word of what we witnessed at the buffer zone managed to outrun our own ship, and then I remember Hannah Pratt's calm face on that view screen, and I understand that the humans likely never intended for the truth to travel quietly at all. Osuk Vel calls the session to order, his voice carrying less of its usual authority than I remember from before we departed. "Envoy Thess," he says, "you and Envoy Kor will present your findings from the buffer zone mission." I rise, and for a long moment I simply stand there, feeling every eye in the chamber settle on me, feeling the full weight of 3 centuries of Concord doctrine pressing down on the words I am about to speak. I think of Claire Bennett's steady voice in the corridor outside this very room. I think of the words she wrote, noted, patient, and unhurried. I think of Hannah Pratt telling me to tell the truth, whether the council was prepared to hear it or not. When our fleet arrived at the buffer zone, bordering human space, I begin, we did not find a fortified border, nor did we find a fleet prepared for conflict. We found a gathering, representatives from at least 11 species, 6 of them Concord members, 5 of them entirely unaffiliated, assembled peacefully alongside the human frontier fleet, present not to threaten our arriving vessels, but to witness what would happen when they arrived. A ripple of unease moves through the chamber, delegates leaning toward one another, whispered exchanges rising and falling like wind through dry grass. Among the Concord member species present, I continue, was an independent trading vessel, registered to a Karnathi civilian collective, operating entirely outside our command authority, present at the invitation of the human fleet and by the free choice of its own crew. Carson Ayol rises sharply from her seat. "This is a violation of Concord registration law," she says. "Member species do not operate independent military coordination without council authorization." It was not military coordination, Wesekor says, rising beside me. It was a peaceful gathering, undertaken by free choice, of species who wished to observe whether the Concord's doctrine of consequence for refusal was in fact true. And what did they observe? Asks a quiet voice from further down the table. I recognize the speaker as a young Trellan delegate, barely into her first term of council service, her voice trembling slightly with a question she clearly already fears the answer to. I look at her, and I answer honestly, because I have decided, somewhere over the 11 days of our return journey, that honesty is the only thing I have left to offer this council that might actually matter. They observed nothing happen at all, I say. No fleet descended on human colonies. No punishment was delivered for their refusal of our terms. Our own fleet, dispatched under the label of a demonstration of resolve, arrived, postured, and accomplished nothing beyond confirming, in front of 11 species and however many more who will hear of it in the coming weeks, that refusing the Concord does not end in ruin. The chamber breaks into open argument, voices rising over one another, some outraged, some frightened, a few strangely, quietly relieved, the same mixture of emotion I saw on the bridge of the Anseal Vigil when Hannah Pratt's calm voice first came through our comm system. Ossock calls for order 3 times before the noise finally settles into a tense, simmering quiet. "This is unacceptable," Carson Ayol says, her voice sharp enough to cut through the remaining murmur. "If word of this spreads unchecked, every disaffected species within our borders will begin to question 3 centuries of established order. We must respond decisively. A show of true force, not empty posturing, sent directly against Earth's core systems, to remind every species watching that the Concord's authority is not merely doctrine, but fact. And if that fails," Wesekor says quietly, "as our posturing already has, what message do you imagine that sends instead?" Carson Ayol has no immediate answer, and the silence that follows tells me she has not truly considered that possibility, because in 300 years, no one has ever had to. It is Wessa who speaks again, and this time her voice carries to every corner of the chamber, steady and unhurried, the voice of someone who has finally decided to stop protecting a truth she no longer believes in. "I would ask this council to consider something," she says. "We have built our entire structure on the assumption that no species could survive, let alone thrive, without our protection and our order. Humanity has just shown 11 other species inside and outside our borders that this assumption was never tested, because no one ever dared to test it. We can respond to that discovery with force, and confirm, once and for all, that our order was never protection at all, only control wearing protection's face. Or we can respond with the one thing this council has never once offered a new species from the very first moment of contact: an honest conversation, between equals, without the shadow of consequence hanging over every word." A long silence follows her words, broken finally by the young Trellan delegate, who asks the question that I suspect every quiet, uncertain voice in that chamber has been afraid to ask aloud. "If we choose force," she says, "and it fails as our posturing already has, what happens to us then? Not to humanity, to the Concord itself." I answer her, because I find that I am the only one in the chamber willing to say the thing everyone else already fears. Then every species who has ever wondered, quietly, in private, whether there was a better way than ours, will have their answer, I say. They will have watched us reach for force the moment our authority was questioned, and they will understand, the way humanity clearly already understands, that our order was never built on trust. It was built on fear, and fear only holds for as long as no one tests whether it is real. The vote that follows is not immediate. It stretches across 3 more days of closed session, debates I am not permitted to fully recount here, though the final result, when it comes, surprises exactly no one who was present in that corridor with Claire Bennett, and surprises every single delegate who was not. The council votes, narrowly, against a further show of force. Not out of newfound wisdom, I suspect, but out of simple fear that a second failed demonstration would finish what the first one had already begun. Ossock Vel is tasked instead with drafting a formal diplomatic communication to Earth, one that does not demand, but requests, a resumption of talks, this time without a predetermined outcome, without a permanent seat at the back of any chamber, without the shadow of consequence hanging over every clause. I am asked, along with Wessa Core, to deliver that communication personally. We travel back to the human homeworld 3 weeks later, and this time, when we arrive, there is no folding chair left carelessly by the door. There is a proper seat, at the center of the table, waiting for whoever Earth chooses to send. Claire Bennett is waiting for us in a quiet meeting room near the transport dock, alone this time, without the rest of her delegation, dressed the same as she was the first day I met her, gray coat, no medals, nothing to announce who she is beyond the calm certainty in her posture. "Envoy Thess," she says, rising to greet me. "Envoy Core, I heard the Council's decision. I have to say, I wasn't entirely certain which way it would go." "Neither was I admit." She gestures for us to sit, and for a long moment, none of us speak, the silence settling comfortably between us in a way that would have felt impossible the first day we met. "Why did you do it this way?" I finally ask her. "The gathering at the buffer zone, the quiet years of conversation before the summit ever happened. You could have simply refused our terms and let the consequences unfold in private, without an audience. Why make certain the entire galaxy was watching?" Claire considers the question carefully before answering, and when she speaks, her voice carries none of the triumph I might have expected, only a tired, honest weight, the voice of someone who has spent a very long time hoping for exactly this outcome without ever being certain it would come. "Because fear only works in the dark, Envoy Thess," she says. "The Concord's authority depended on every species believing, privately, that they alone would suffer if they refused it. As long as that belief stayed private, it stayed powerful. The moment we made it public, the moment 11 species stood together and watched nothing happen, that fear stopped being able to hide. We didn't walk away from your talks to defy you. We walked away to show everyone else that walking away was possible. What your council does next was never really about us, Envoy Thess. It was about everyone who's been afraid to ask the same questions we did." I sit with that answer for a long moment, feeling the full shape of it settle over me. 3 centuries of assumed order, suddenly rendered fragile by nothing more than a quiet, patient refusal to be afraid. "What happens now?" I ask her, the same question I asked in that corridor months ago, though this time I ask it not as an envoy defending an order I still believe in, but as someone genuinely uncertain what comes next, and strangely unafraid of that uncertainty. Claire Bennett smiles, faint but real, the first true smile I have seen from her since the day we met. "Now," she says, "we talk, properly, this time. No predetermined terms, no seat at the back of the room, just 2 people, and everyone they represent, trying to figure out honestly what a fair galaxy might actually look like." "And if we cannot agree?" I ask. "Then we keep talking," she says simply. "That's the whole secret, Envoy Thess. There was never a trick to what we did. We just decided, a long time ago, that we would rather have honest disagreement than comfortable submission. It turns out a lot of people out there felt exactly the same way. They just needed someone to prove it was allowed. I think of Ossoc Vel, standing in that chamber 3 centuries deep in doctrine, insisting that our order was generosity rather than control. I think of Carson Iol, certain until the very end that force was the only language a young species could understand. I think of Wessa Core, quietly choosing truth over comfort in a corridor lined with statues of unifiers who never once imagined a species patient enough to simply wait them out. And I think of myself, 300 years old, having spent every one of those years believing I understood what held the galaxy together, only to learn, in a folding chair by a door meant for a quick exit, that the answer had never been strength at all. It had always been the quiet, unshaken patience of people who were simply no longer willing to be afraid. "Then let us talk," I say to Claire Bennett, and for the first time since I entered that chamber months ago, translator flaring with a warning I did not understand, I find that I am not afraid of what comes next either. Outside the window behind her, I can see human ships moving quietly against the stars, not massed for war, not postured for threat, simply present, steady, and patient, the way they had been from the very first moment I ever felt that cold thread crawl up my spine, and did not yet know why. I understand now. It was never fear of what humanity might do. It was the first true recognition, in 300 years, of a species that had already decided it would never again mistake patience for permission, and would never again let anyone else mistake it for weakness either.